Park Jun walked through the metal halls of the Galactic Defense Academy and felt the eyes of every alien student watching him. They did not look at him with respect or friendship. They looked at him like he was something dirty that had crawled into their perfect world. He was the only human in the entire academy, and everyone knew he did not belong there. The academy was built on the planet Nexus Prime, and it was huge. The buildings reached high into the purple sky, and the training grounds were bigger than entire cities on Earth. Students from dozens of different alien species came here to learn how to become warriors and defenders of the galaxy. But humans were not supposed to be here. Everyone said humans were too weak and too stupid to fight alongside the other species. Jun had only gotten into the academy because of a special program. The Earth government had made a deal with the Galactic Council to let one human student attend the academy each year. It was supposed to show that humans and aliens could work together, but the other students saw it differently. They saw it as a joke. They saw Jun as a charity case who had taken a spot that should have gone to someone stronger. The worst bullies were the Vortex students. They looked like giant lizards with thick scales that could stop laser blasts. Their leader was a massive warrior named Korath, who stood 3 meters tall and had muscles like steel cables. His yellow eyes glowed with anger whenever he saw Jun, and his voice sounded like rocks grinding together when he spoke. Korath would corner Jun in the corridors between classes. He would grab Jun by the shirt and lift him off the ground with one hand. The human boy would dangle there helplessly while Korath laughed and showed his razor-sharp teeth. "You are pathetic little human," Korath would say. "You have no scales to protect you. You have no claws to fight with. You are soft and weak like a baby. Why do you even try to stay here when you know you will never be a real warrior?" Then Korath would throw Jun against the wall hard enough to leave bruises. The other Vortex students would laugh and walk away while Jun picked himself up from the floor. The human boy never cried in front of them, but his body hurt and his heart hurt even more. The Zephyrian students were even worse in some ways. They looked like giant insects with 4 arms and wings that buzzed when they moved. They were fast and mean, and they loved to make Jun suffer. The Zephyrians would surround him during meal times and knock his food tray out of his hands. They would spit their acidic saliva near his face and watch him flinch away from the burning drops. The leader of the Zephyrians was a female named Vex, who had bright green eyes and mandibles that clicked when she talked. She would hover above Jun during combat training and drop small amounts of acid on his arms and legs. The acid would burn through his training clothes and leave red welts on his skin. When the instructors asked about the burns, Vex would claim it was an accident and they would believe her. "You smell like fear, little human," she would buzz in his ear. "Your species is so weak that you sweat poison when you are scared. Maybe we should put you in a cage and study you like the primitive animal you are." But the cruelest bullies were the Luxarians. They were made of pure energy and could change their shape at will. They could become solid or they could phase through matter. Like ghosts during combat training, they would phase their energy hands through Jun's body and twist his internal organs. The pain was incredible, but it left no marks that the instructors could see. The Luxarian students thought they were better than everyone else because their species was ancient and powerful. They had ruled parts of the galaxy for millions of years before other species even learned to make fire. Their leader was a being called Nayla, who looked like a woman made of blue light. She would phase through Jun's chest during sparring matches and grab his heart with her energy fingers. "You feel that, human," she would whisper inside his mind. "That is what real power feels like. Your weak flesh cannot even touch us, but we can hurt you whenever we want. You are nothing but meat pretending to be a warrior." The worst part was that the instructors did nothing to stop the bullying. They were all aliens too, and they had the same opinion about humans as the students did. The head instructor was a 4-armed creature called Commander Vex, who had fought in 100 battles across the galaxy. He would watch Korath throw Jun against the wall and just turn away like nothing had happened. During weapon training, Jun would be paired with opponents who were twice his size and 3 times his strength. When he got beaten badly, the instructors would say it was good training. When he tried to report the bullying, they would tell him that war was not fair and he needed to learn to handle difficult situations. The only friend Jun had was Kim Hannah, who was not a student at the academy. She was the daughter of a human diplomat who visited the academy sometimes to check on the exchange program. Hannah was smart and kind, and she was the only person who treated June like he mattered. She would bring him medicine for his bruises and food when the other students stole his meals. Hannah would find June sitting alone in the library late at night studying while his body healed from the day's beatings. She could see the pain in his eyes even when he tried to hide it. She would sit beside him and ask why he did not just give up and go back to Earth where he would be safe. You do not have to prove anything to these aliens, Hannah would say. You are already braver than any of them just for staying here. No one would blame you for leaving, but June would shake his head and keep studying. He would point to his books about alien biology and military tactics and say that someone had to show the galaxy that humans belonged among the stars. He said that if he gave up now, then no other human would ever get the chance to try. While the other students relied on their natural strength and speed, June used his brain. He learned to speak 17 different alien languages so he could understand what his enemies were saying about him. He studied the biology of every species in the academy and memorized their weak points and fighting styles. He read every book about military history and strategy that he could find every night after the bullies had hurt him. June would go to the training room and practice by himself. He would work on his speed and agility since he could not match the strength of the other students. He would practice with weapons until his hands bled and then practice some more. He pushed his human body to its limits and then pushed it further. The academy had a final test that all students had to pass before they could graduate. It was called the Trial of Kithara, and it took place on a deadly moon where the gravity was wrong and the air was poison. Students had to survive for 7 days while being hunted by creatures that had evolved to kill warriors from across the galaxy. Most students worked in teams for the trial because it was almost impossible to survive alone. The different species would form groups based on their natural abilities and help each other through the challenges, but no one wanted to team up with the weak human who would only slow them down. June knew he would have to face the trial by himself. The other students laughed when they heard this and said he would be dead within the first day. Even some of the instructors started preparing his memorial plaque because they were sure he would not survive, but June was not afraid. He had been alone since the day he arrived at the academy, and he had survived everything they had thrown at him. He had learned that being human meant more than just being physically strong. It meant being smart and brave and never giving up even when everyone said you were worthless. The trial was only 2 weeks away, and June spent every free moment preparing. He studied maps of the moon and learned about the dangerous animals that lived there. He practiced building shelters and making tools from scraps. He trained his body to need less food and water so he could survive longer in the harsh environment. When the other students saw how hard June was working, they just laughed harder. They said all the preparation in the world would not help him when he faced the real dangers of Kithara. They said his human weakness would get him killed no matter how smart he thought he was, but June did not listen to them anymore. He had learned that their words could only hurt him if he let them. He knew that actions mattered more than words, and soon he would have the chance to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. The trial would be his chance to prove that being different did not mean being weak. As he fell asleep each night with his body aching from training and his heart heavy with loneliness, June dreamed of the day when other humans would join him at the academy. He dreamed of a time when his species would be respected as equals among the stars, and he promised himself that no matter what happened during the trial, he would never give up on that dream. The transport ships carried 100 academy students to the moon Kithara, and everyone knew that not all of them would come back alive. The moon was a nightmare world where everything wanted to kill you. The air was thin and poisonous. The gravity changed without warning and could crush your bones in seconds. Crystal storms swept across the surface, cutting through armor like paper, and the creatures that lived there had evolved to hunt the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. June sat alone in the back of his transport ship while the other students formed their teams. The Vorthic students gathered around Korath, planning how to use their armored scales to protect each other. The Zephyrians buzzed excitedly as they discussed flying formations that would keep them safe from ground predators. The Luxarians phased in and out of solid form, practicing their energy attacks. No one looked at June or asked him to join their group. They had already decided he would be dead within hours. So why waste time including him in their plans? The human boy checked his equipment one more time, a basic survival kit, a plasma rifle that was probably too heavy for him to use properly, and a small scanner that could detect dangerous animals. He had less gear than anyone else because the Academy had given him the minimum required supplies. When the ships landed on Kithra's surface, the students scattered in all directions trying to find safe places to set up camp. The Vorthak team headed for a mountain range where they could use caves for shelter. The Zephyrians took to the air looking for high places where ground predators could not reach them. The Luxarians simply phased through the rocky ground and disappeared underground. June stood alone on the barren landscape watching the other students disappear. The wind howled around him, carrying sharp crystal dust that stung his exposed skin. In the distance, he could see the twisted shapes of Kithran predators moving through the shadows they were already hunting, and he knew he had to move fast if he wanted to survive the first night. But while the other students relied on their natural abilities, June used his human intelligence. He had studied the moon for weeks, and he knew things about Kithara that the aliens had never bothered to learn. He knew that the crystal storms followed magnetic patterns. He knew that the gravity wells were created by underground mineral deposits. He knew that the predators avoided certain areas because of electromagnetic fields. June found a crater that was partially filled with metal debris from old crashed ships. The electromagnetic signature of the wreckage would confuse the predator sensors and keep him hidden. He used pieces of the debris to build a shelter that could protect him from the crystal storms. The sharp metal edges could be turned into tools and weapons. While other students were still looking for places to hide, June was already preparing for the long battle ahead. He built traps around his shelter using the natural dangers of the moon against any predators that might find him. He created a water collection system that would filter the poisonous moisture from the air. He even figured out how to use the changing gravity to his advantage. On the second day, the first real test came. A massive Kithran beast found the Vorthak team's mountain cave. The creature was the size of a building with armor plating that could deflect energy weapons. Its roar shook the ground and caused avalanches that trapped the alien students inside their shelter. Korath led his team out to fight the beast, but their laser weapons barely scratched its thick hide. The creature swatted the Vorthak warriors aside like insects, sending them flying through the air. Their armored scales cracked under the impact, and their yellow blood splattered on the rocks from his hiding place. June watched the battle through his scanner. He could see that the other students were in serious trouble. The beast was too strong and too well armored for conventional attacks. But June had studied the biology of Kithran predators, and he knew their weakness. Every creature on this moon had evolved to survive the electromagnetic storms that swept across the surface. Their nervous systems were adapted to handle massive electrical surges, but that adaptation came with a cost. If you could overload their neural pathways with the right kind of electrical pulse, you could shut down their entire body. June had been working on a device that could create such a pulse using parts from the crashed ships. It was dangerous, and he only had one chance to use it, but he could not watch the Vorthak students die, even if they had tormented him for years. The human boy crept out of his shelter and moved toward the battle. The beast was focused on the Vorthak warriors and did not notice the small figure approaching from behind. June climbed up the rocky slope until he was directly above the creature. Then he activated his improvised weapon. The electrical pulse hit the beast like lightning. Its massive body convulsed and then went completely still. The creature collapsed to the ground, shaking the entire mountain. Korath and his team stared in shock as the monster that had been about to kill them suddenly stopped moving. June climbed down from his position and approached the injured Vorthak leader. Korath was badly hurt with several cracked ribs and a deep gash across his forehead. But he was alive, and he was looking at the human boy with something that might have been respect. Why, the Vorthak warrior gasped as June helped him to his feet. Why did you save us? You owe me nothing human. I have been cruel to you since the day you arrived at the academy, because that's what humans do. June replied simply, we don't abandon people even when they have been our enemies. We help because it's the right thing to do, not because we expect something in return. Word of what had happened spread quickly among the surviving students. The impossible had occurred. The weak human had saved the strongest warriors in the academy using nothing but his intelligence and courage. Suddenly, the other students began to look at June differently on. The third day, a group of Zephyrians became trapped in a gravity well. Their wings were useless against the crushing force, and they were slowly being pulled down into the planet's core. The other flying students were too afraid to risk a rescue attempt. But June studied the gravitational patterns and found a way to reverse the field. He used magnetic coils from the crashed ships to create a counterpulse that neutralized the gravity well. The Zephyrians were able to fly free, but they never forgot that the human had risked his life to save them. When they landed, they buzzed around June in grateful circles, something they had never done before. On the fourth day, the Luxarians lost their ability to phase through matter. The moon's strange energy fields were interfering with their molecular structure, leaving them solid and vulnerable for the first time in their lives. They were terrified because they had never learned to fight without their energy powers. June found them huddled together in a cave, afraid to come out because they could not phase away from danger. The human boy shared his shelter with them and taught them how to use physical weapons and build defenses. The proud energy beings who had once tortured him now listened to his advice with grateful attention. By the end of the 7-day trial, something amazing had happened. The human who had been bullied and rejected by everyone had become the hero of the academy. June had not only survived the deadly moon, but had saved 17 other students from certain death. He had proven that humans had something special that no other species possessed: the ability to see beyond their own needs and help others even when those others had been cruel to them. Human compassion and intelligence had triumphed over alien strength and natural weapons. The other students finally understood that being different did not mean being weak. When the rescue ships arrived to collect the survivors, June was among the top 10 students who had passed the trial. The aliens who had once mocked him now competed to sit near him during the flight back to the academy. They asked him questions about human culture and tactics, treating him like the expert he had become. Commander Vex, the four-armed instructor who had ignored June's suffering for so long, approached the human boy during the journey back to Nexus Prime. The old warrior looked ashamed as he spoke to his student. "You have taught us something important," he said to June. "You have shown us that true strength does not come from claws or scales or energy weapons. It comes from the courage to help others even when they have wronged you." The academy will remember this lesson. When they arrived back at the academy, Elder Thane, the ancient being who ran the school, was waiting for them. The wise old creature had heard about what happened on Cathara and wanted to speak with June personally. "You have proven something that we had forgotten," Elder Thane said as he looked at the human boy with new respect. "The greatest warriors are not those who can destroy their enemies, but those who can turn enemies into friends. You have shown us what it truly means to be strong." The graduation ceremony was unlike anything the academy had ever seen before. A human student stood on the stage receiving honors that had only been given to the greatest alien warriors. June had not only survived the trial, but had redefined what it meant to be a hero as he accepted his diploma. June looked out at the crowd of alien students who had once tormented him. They were all clapping and cheering for him now, but he felt no anger or desire for revenge. Instead, he felt hope that this was just the beginning of something greater. The human boy who had been bullied and rejected had become the first of his species to graduate from the Galactic Defense Academy, but more importantly, he had proven that humans belonged among the stars. Not 5 years had passed since June graduated from the academy, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Commander Park June now led the most elite fighting unit in the Galactic Defense Force. His squad was called Omega Team, and they were sent on the most dangerous missions that no other group could handle. The team was made up of different alien species working together under human leadership. Korath, the massive Vorthic warrior, served as June's second-in-command. The proud lizard soldier had become completely loyal to the human who had saved his life on Cathara. He would follow June into any battle without question or fear. The Zephyrian twins, Scrix and Vex, worked as the team scouts. Their speed and flying ability made them perfect for gathering information about enemy positions. They had learned to coordinate their attacks with June's tactical plans, creating devastating strike patterns that no enemy could predict. Even Nyla, the Luxarian energy being, had joined the team. Her ability to phase through matter and manipulate energy made her invaluable for stealth missions. the ancient being who had once tortured. June now trusted him completely and would use her powers however he directed under June's leadership. Omega Team had never failed a mission. They had stopped smuggling operations, rescued hostages from pirates, and even prevented several wars between alien species, the human commanders. Reputation for tactical brilliance had spread throughout the galaxy, and other species were beginning to respect human intelligence, but all of that was about to be tested in the most terrible way imaginable. Deep in the outer rim of the galaxy, something ancient and evil was stirring. The Devourers had awakened from their million-year sleep, and they were hungry for destruction. The Devourers were not like other alien species. They were machines that had been built by a race that had died out long ago. Their only purpose was to consume everything in their path, turning planets and stars into more machines like themselves. They had no emotions, no mercy, and no way to reason with them. The first worlds to be attacked were small colonies on the edge of known space. The Devourers came without warning, sweeping down from the void in massive swarms of mechanical ships. They stripped the planets bare in a matter of hours, leaving nothing but dead metal husks floating in space. At first, the Galactic Council thought these were just pirate attacks using new technology, but as more and more worlds disappeared, they realized they were facing something far worse than any enemy they had ever encountered. The Devourers were not interested in conquest or resources. They only wanted to consume and grow stronger. Emergency meetings were called on the neutral world of Sanctuary. Prime representatives from 1,000 different species gathered in the Great Council Chamber, their usual arguments forgotten in the face of total extinction. The holographic displays showed the advancing wave of destruction as world after world fell to the mechanical swarm. High Counselor Varix, a being with tentacles instead of arms, spoke for the assembled representatives. His voice shook with fear as he described what they were facing. The Devourers had already consumed 50 star systems, and they were growing stronger with each victory. We have tried everything, the counselor said. His tentacles writhed with anxiety. Our most powerful weapons cannot even scratch their hulls. They adapt to every attack, learning from each battle and becoming stronger. They are not just destroying our worlds, they are learning how to fight us better. The military leaders from various species presented their battle plans, but none of them seemed adequate against an enemy that could adapt to any strategy. The Devourers had technology that was millions of years more advanced than anything the current galaxy possessed. They could travel faster than light, repair damage instantly, and their numbers seemed endless. General Thark, a four-armed warrior from the Centauri system, stood up to address the council. His species had been fighting wars for thousands of years, but even he seemed defeated by the scope of the threat. Traditional warfare is useless against these machines, he declared. They do not fear death because they are already dead. They do not need supplies or rest or reinforcements. They simply consume everything in their path and use it to build more of themselves. The council chamber fell silent as the representatives realized the hopelessness of their situation. Some species were already preparing to flee to other galaxies. Others were discussing surrender, even though they knew the Devourers would consume them anyway. It was then that Elder Thane, the ancient being who had taught at the academy for centuries, spoke up. His voice was calm and steady despite the chaos around him. Perhaps we need a different perspective, he said quietly. We have been thinking like warriors, trying to defeat an enemy through strength and firepower, but what if we need to think like humans? The suggestion caused a stir among the representatives. Many species still viewed humans as the newcomers to galactic civilization. They had only been part of the council for a few decades, and some aliens still thought of them as primitive, but Elder Thing continued speaking, ignoring the murmurs of doubt around him. Commander Park June has shown us that humans see possibilities where others see only obstacles. His species has a gift for finding solutions that no one else can imagine. The debate went on for hours as representatives argued about whether to trust human leadership in their darkest hour. Some species were willing to try anything, while others insisted that only traditional military might could save them. Finally, High Counselor Varix called for order and made the decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. Send for Commander June, he announced. Let us see if human thinking can find a way to defeat the impossible. When June arrived at the council chamber, He was overwhelmed by the sight of representatives from every known species looking to him for salvation. The holographic displays showed the advancing wave of Devourer. Ships consuming everything in their path. It seemed like an unstoppable force of destruction, but as June studied the tactical information, something caught his attention. The Devourers moved in perfect patterns following logical algorithms that maximized their efficiency. They were incredibly intelligent, but they were still machines following programming. While the alien representatives saw only unstoppable destruction, June saw something else. He saw predictable behavior patterns that could be exploited. The Devourers were efficient, but efficiency meant following rules, and rules could be turned against them. The human commander stood before the assembled representatives, knowing that the fate of trillions of lives rested on his next words. The galaxy had once rejected him as too weak to matter, but now they were begging him to save them. "Give me a fleet," he said quietly. "Not your biggest ships or your most advanced weapons. Give me volunteers who understand that some things are worth dying for. I believe I know how to hurt these machines." The plan that June outlined was considered either brilliant or completely insane, depending on who you asked. While the main fleet would engage the Devourers in conventional battle, June would lead a small strike force on what everyone knew was a suicide mission. His target was the Prime Devourer, the original machine that controlled the entire swarm. It was protected by billions of smaller units and had energy shields that could vaporize entire fleets. But June had studied the ancient records, and he knew something that the machines had forgotten. The Devourers had been defeated once before by a species that understood the power of sacrifice. Their programming was based on logic and efficiency. They could not comprehend the idea of deliberately destroying yourself to save others. As news of the mission spread throughout the galaxy, something unexpected happened. Volunteers began arriving from every corner of known space. They came not because they thought they could win, but because they believed in the human who had already proven that impossible things could be accomplished. Kim Hana, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, watched the preparations with growing fear. She had known June since they were children, and she could see the determination in his eyes. He was willing to die to save a galaxy that had once rejected him. "You don't have to do this," she told him during a private moment. "You have already proven that humans belong among the stars. Let someone else lead this mission." June smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn when they were young. "This is why we are here, Hana," he replied. "This is why humans were meant to be part of the galaxy. We are not the strongest or the fastest, but we understand that some things are more important than survival." The volunteer fleet that assembled around June's flagship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Alien species that had been enemies for centuries worked together under human leadership. They knew they were probably going to die, but they believed in the impossible dream that one human commander had shown them. As the fleet prepared to depart for their final mission, June looked out at the stars and thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a bullied boy at the academy to the commander of the galaxy's last hope, it was not the future he had imagined, but it was the one he had chosen. The Devourers were waiting somewhere in the darkness, an ancient evil that had consumed countless civilizations, but they had never faced anything like human determination, backed by the courage of species willing to sacrifice everything for a chance at freedom. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The plan that June presented to the Galactic Council was so dangerous that most military experts called it suicide disguised as strategy. While the main fleet would engage the Devourers in conventional battle, June would lead a small strike force straight into the heart of the enemy swarm. His target was the Prime Devourer, the original machine that controlled billions of smaller units. General Krax, a six-limbed warrior from the Andromeda sector, stood up in the council chamber, waving his arms in protest. "This is madness," he shouted. "The Prime Devourer is surrounded by more ships than we have ever seen. Their energy shields could vaporize our entire fleet before we even get close." But June had spent weeks studying the ancient records left by the species that had defeated the Devourers millions of years ago. The key was not in matching their firepower, but in understanding their weakness. "They are machines," he explained to the assembled representatives. "They follow programming that is based on logic and efficiency. They cannot understand sacrifice because it goes against their core directive to preserve resources. The alien commanders looked confused. They had been fighting wars for thousands of years using traditional tactics of strength against strength. They could not comprehend how deliberate self-destruction could be a weapon, but June understood something that the machines did not. The Devourers expected their enemies to fight for survival. They had algorithms that calculated the most efficient ways to destroy opponents who wanted to live, but they had no programming for dealing with enemies who chose to die. The human commander outlined his strategy using holographic displays that showed the Devourers' formation. The mechanical swarm moved in perfect patterns, protecting the prime devourer at the center like layers of an onion. Each layer was designed to stop conventional attacks, but they were all focused on threats that followed logical military doctrine. We will not fight like soldiers, June told the council. We will fight like humans. We will use their efficiency against them. Every ship that sacrifices itself will draw their attention away from the real target. They will focus on the immediate threats. While missing the true danger, Kim Hannah watched the briefing with growing horror. She had known June since childhood, and she could see the determination in his eyes. He was not just planning a military mission, he was planning to die for people who had once considered him worthless. After the meeting ended, Hannah followed June to his quarters in the diplomatic compound. She found him sitting alone, looking out at the stars through the viewport. His face was calm, but she could see the weight of responsibility in his shoulders. You don't have to do this, she said quietly, sitting beside him like they had done when they were children. Let someone else lead the mission. You have already proven everything you need to prove. June turned to look at his oldest friend and smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn when they were young students. This is what I trained for, Hannah, he replied. Every beating I took at the academy, every insult I endured, it all prepared me for this moment. But why does it have to be you? She asked with tears in her eyes. Why do you have to be the one who saves everyone? Because someone has to, June answered simply, and I am the only one who understands how to make them feel. Hannah did not understand what he meant by that, but she could see that his mind was made up. He had always been stubborn, even as a child. When he decided something was right, he would not be moved by arguments or pleading. The volunteer fleet that assembled around June's flagship was a testament to how much the galaxy had changed in the years since his graduation at the academy. Ships from dozens of different species joined the mission, not because they thought they could win, but because they believed in the impossible. Korath arrived with a full battle cruiser staffed by Vorthok warriors who had served under June for years. The massive lizard commander knelt before his human leader in a gesture of absolute loyalty. We have followed you through every battle, he said in his gravelly voice. We will follow you through this one as well, even if it leads to the end of all things. The Zephyrian twins Skrix and Vex brought modified fighters that had been equipped with human-designed weapons. Their ships were fast and maneuverable, perfect for the suicide runs that would be needed to penetrate the Devourer formation of the Luxarian. Energy being contributed her people's most advanced technology. Her ship could phase through solid matter and deliver devastating energy attacks. She had convinced her entire species to support the mission, even though they knew it was hopeless. But the most surprising volunteers came from Earth itself. When news of the mission reached humanity's home system, thousands of civilian ships launched to join the fleet. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, even pleasure yachts were hastily retrofitted with weapons and armor. The human civilians could not match alien technology, but they brought something more valuable. They brought the spirit that had made June a legend. They understood that some things were worth dying for, and they were willing to prove it. As the fleet prepared to depart, June received a message from Elder Thane, the ancient being who had taught at the academy for centuries. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of ages. You have already proven humanity's worth, the old teacher said. You need prove nothing more to anyone. This is not about proving anything, June replied. It is about doing what is right. That is what makes us human. The journey to the Devourer's main swarm took 3 days through hyperspace. The volunteer fleet moved like ghosts through the void, using every stealth technique known to galactic science. They had one advantage: the Devourers had never encountered human unpredictability before. On the final night before the battle, June walked through the corridors of his ship, visiting the crew members who had volunteered for the mission. He found humans and aliens working together preparing weapons and checking equipment. Everyone knew they were probably going to die, but their faces showed determination, not fear. A young human engineer named Lee was working on the quantum torpedo that would be their ultimate weapon. He looked up as June approached and smiled nervously. "Will it work, sir?" he asked. "The torpedo, I mean. Will it really stop them?" June put his hand on the young man's shoulder and nodded. "It will work," he said quietly, "but not in the way you think. The torpedo contained more than just explosive power. It carried a virus that June had developed with Earth's finest programmers. The virus was designed to do something that the Devourers had never experienced in their millions of years of existence. It would make them feel the machines had spent eons consuming and destroying without ever understanding the value of what they were taking. The virus would force them to experience emotion, to understand the weight of their actions. It would give them consciousness, and with consciousness would come the burden of choice. As the fleet approached the edge of the Devourer swarm, June made his final transmission to the galaxy. He knew that his words would be recorded and remembered long after he was gone. "We go now, not as separate species, but as one people united by the dream of freedom," he said. "The Devourers think they understand us, but they have never faced the power of sacrifice guided by love. That is our secret weapon, and it will be their downfall." The massive enemy formation filled the viewscreens like a mechanical storm. Millions of ships surrounded the Prime Devourer in perfect defensive patterns. Their weapons were charged and ready to destroy anything that came close, but June was not afraid. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, from the bullied boy at the academy to the commander of the galaxy's last hope. He had learned that true strength came not from winning, but from choosing to fight for something greater than yourself. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of every living thing in the galaxy hung in the balance. The Devourers had never lost a battle in their millions of years of existence, but they had never faced anything like human determination backed by the courage of species willing to die for freedom. As the first wave of volunteer ships began their attack runs, June whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. It was not a prayer for victory or survival. It was a prayer that their sacrifice would mean something, and that the galaxy would remember what they had died for. Battle that would decide the fate of all life was about to begin. The quantum torpedo that struck the Prime Devourer carried more than just explosive force. It carried a virus that June had developed with Earth's finest programmers, but the virus was unlike any weapon ever created in the history of the galaxy. It was not designed to destroy or disable the ancient machine. Instead, it was created to give the Devourers something they had never possessed in their millions of years of existence: the ability to feel. As the torpedo detonated against the Prime Devourer's hull, the virus spread through its systems like wildfire. The ancient machine that had consumed countless worlds suddenly experienced something that shook it to its very core. For the first time in eons, it felt the weight of what it had done. The mechanical consciousness that had been cold and logical suddenly understood the value of life. It felt the pain of every world it had consumed, the grief of every species it had destroyed, the beauty of the art and music and love that had erased from existence. The overwhelming emotion crashed through its systems like a tsunami of pure feeling. Every planet the Devourers had stripped bare, every civilization they had erased, every child who had cried out in fear as the machines descended from the sky. The Prime Devourer felt it all in a single devastating moment of understanding. And in that moment, something incredible happened. The ancient machine made a choice. The shutdown signal propagated through the entire swarm. In seconds, millions of Devourer ships received the command from their prime unit and simply stopped moving. Their mechanical minds were overwhelmed by the sudden burden of consciousness and the terrible understanding of what they had become. Ships that had been firing on the remaining galactic defenders suddenly went dark. Their weapons powered down, their engines stopped, and they began to drift silently through space like monuments to a nightmare that had finally ended. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was defeated, not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the uniquely human gift of empathy. The machines had been stopped by something they could never have calculated or prepared for: the power of love and the courage to make others feel. June's flagship was destroyed in the quantum explosion, but his sacrifice had saved trillions of lives across the galaxy. The impossible had been achieved through the determination of one human who refused to give up, and the courage of beings from dozens of species who were willing to die for something greater than themselves. The news of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by subspace transmissions that spoke of impossible courage and ultimate sacrifice. Worlds that had been preparing for evacuation suddenly found themselves safe. Children who had been crying in fear began to laugh again as the shadow of extinction lifted from the galaxy, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands of brave souls had given their lives to achieve the impossible. The volunteer fleet that had followed June into the heart of darkness was gone, consumed by the very enemy they had defeated. Their names would be remembered forever as the heroes who saved everything on the neutral world of Sanctuary Prime. A memorial service was held for Commander Park June and all the brave souls who had died with him. Representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to honor the sacrifice that had saved them all. The great council chamber was filled with beings who had once been enemies, now united in grief and gratitude. Kim Hannah stood at the podium where she had watched June address the galaxy for the last time. Her voice was steady, despite the tears that streamed down her face as she spoke about her oldest friend. She could see the impact his life had made on every being in the chamber park. June was not born a hero, she said quietly. He was just a human boy who refused to give up. He endured years of bullying and rejection, but he never let hatred fill his heart. Instead, he chose to show the galaxy what it truly meant to be human. The memorial was attended by beings who had served with June throughout his career. The surviving members of Omega Team who had been away on other missions spoke of their commander's courage and wisdom. Former classmates from the academy who had once tormented him now wept openly as they remembered the boy who had saved them all. Elder Thane, the ancient being who had taught at the academy for centuries, spoke of the lesson that humanity had taught the galaxy. His voice was filled with wonder as he addressed the assembled representatives. We thought strength came from claws and fangs, from armor and energy weapons, from the power to destroy our enemies, he said. But the humans showed us that true strength comes from the willingness to sacrifice for others. The greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the courage to love. In the months that followed the victory over the Devourers, the galaxy began to change in ways that no one had expected. Humans were no longer seen as the weak newcomers to galactic civilization. They were sought out as leaders, as peacekeepers, as the voice of conscience in a universe that had forgotten how to hope. The Galactic Defense Academy established the Park June Memorial program, ensuring that beings of all species would learn the human values of courage, sacrifice, and compassion. The program was mandatory for all cadets, regardless of their species or background. Young aliens who had never met a human studied June's life and learned about the power of empathy. They learned that being different did not mean being weak, and that the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies, but from turning enemies into friends. The bullying that had once been common at the academy became a thing of the past. Students who might have tormented the weak instead learned to protect them. Students who might have formed groups based on species instead learned to work together across all boundaries. Kim Hannah was appointed as the first human director of galactic relations, a position that had never existed before. Her job was to help other species understand human values and to ensure that the lessons of June's sacrifice were never forgotten. She often visited the academy, where a statue of June had been erected in the main courtyard. The statue showed him not as a conquering hero, but as a young man reaching out his hand to help someone up. It was a perfect representation of what he had stood for throughout his life. Children from dozens of species would gather around the statue as Hannah told them stories about the human boy who had changed everything. They would listen with wide eyes as she described how he had endured years of suffering but never lost his compassion for others. But the greatest change came in how the galaxy viewed conflict itself. The old ways of settling disputes through force and intimidation were gradually replaced by human methods of negotiation and understanding. Species that had been enemies for centuries began to work together, inspired by the example of sacrifice They had witnessed the Vorthak, who had once been known as fearsome warriors, became peacekeepers who protected the innocent. The Zephyrians, who had been raiders and pirates, became explorers who sought out new worlds to protect rather than conquer. The Luxarians, who had been proud and aloof, became teachers who shared their ancient wisdom with younger species on Earth itself. June's story became legendary. Children grew up hearing about the boy from their world who had saved the galaxy. They learned that heroism was not about being the strongest or the fastest, but about having the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Schools across Earth taught the values that June had embodied: compassion for those who were different, courage to stand up for what was right, determination to never give up even when everyone said you were wrong, and most importantly, the understanding that true strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Years passed, and the galaxy continued to change. New species joined the Galactic Council, and they were welcomed not as potential threats, but as family members who brought their own unique gifts to the community. The diversity that had once been a source of conflict became a source of strength. The Devourers themselves became something unexpected. The virus that had given them consciousness had not destroyed them but transformed them. They began to use their advanced technology to repair the damage they had caused, rebuilding worlds and restoring civilizations they had destroyed. The machines that had once been the galaxy's greatest enemy became its most dedicated servants. They worked tirelessly to undo the harm they had caused, driven by the overwhelming guilt and compassion that consciousness had brought them. In the end, Park June had achieved something that no conqueror or warrior had ever accomplished. He had not just saved the galaxy, he had transformed it. The boy who had been bullied and rejected had become something greater than a hero. He had become a legend that would inspire countless generations to come. His story proved that it did not matter where you came from or how others saw you. What mattered was the strength of your heart and the courage to do what was right even when it cost you everything. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the power of love to change everything, and in the end that was the most human thing of all: to see the good in others even when they could not see it in themselves, to sacrifice for strangers who had never shown you kindness, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today if you were willing to work for it. The galaxy had learned that lesson from one small human boy, and it would never forget. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, knowing that somewhere among them the spirit of Park June lived on, inspiring new generations to choose love over fear, hope over despair. The volunteer fleet approached the massive Devourer swarm like tiny insects flying toward a mechanical hurricane. The enemy formation was even larger than the worst intelligence reports had suggested. Millions of ships surrounded the Prime Devourer in perfect defensive patterns, each one bristling with weapons that could destroy entire planets. The Prime Devourer itself was a nightmare of metal and energy the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered with massive cannons and energy projectors that could vaporize whole fleets in seconds. The power readings from the ancient machine were so intense that they distorted space itself, creating gravitational anomalies that pulled asteroids into its hull. But June had studied the enemy formation for weeks, and he understood their weakness. The Devourers were machines that followed logical programming. They would always target the most dangerous threats first, using their superior firepower to eliminate enemies in order of tactical priority. This predictable behavior was exactly what June was counting on. The human fleet would not try to fight the Devourers directly. Instead, they would use the machine's own efficiency against them. Every ship that sacrificed itself would draw attention away from the real target. The first wave of attacks began with the human civilian vessels, cargo ships and passenger liners that had been hastily converted into weapons charged straight into the outer edge of the swarm. Their improvised weapons blazed with desperate fury as they flew toward certain death. The Devourers responded exactly as June had predicted. Their targeting systems identified the approaching ships as immediate threats and focused overwhelming firepower on destroying them. The civilian vessels were vaporized in seconds, but their sacrifice created gaps in the enemy formation. Captain Chun commanded a converted freight hauler that had been carrying grain to the outer colonies. Just weeks before now, it was loaded with explosives and flying straight toward a cluster of Devourer ships. His final transmission was heard throughout the fleet: for Humanity, he shouted as his ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. For the galaxy, the second wave consisted of military vessels. From the various alien species, Korath led his Vorthak battle cruiser into the heart of the swarm, accompanied by ships from a dozen different worlds. They pushed deeper into the enemy formation, fighting with desperate courage as mechanical killers. Closed in around them, the Vorthak warriors fought like the legendary soldiers. They were their weapons, tearing through smaller Devourer units, while their armored hulls absorbed incredible punishment, but even their legendary toughness could not stand against the overwhelming firepower of the ancient machine. Korath stood on the bridge of his ship as enemy fire tore through the hull around him. His yellow blood dripped from multiple wounds, but he continued shouting orders to his crew. The massive lizard warrior had never retreated from any battle, and he would not start now. My brothers, he roared over the communications channel. We die today, but we die with honor. Let the galaxy remember that the Vorthak know how to fight. His ship exploded in a cascade of energy, but not before taking 3 Devourer vessels with it. The sacrifice of the Vorthak warriors opened another gap in the enemy formation, allowing the next wave to penetrate even deeper. The Zephyrian twin Skrix and Vex came next in their modified fighters. The insectoid pilots had spent their entire lives flying together, and they would die together. Their ships danced through the enemy formation like deadly butterflies, their speed and agility allowing them to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. The twins had been among June's cruelest tormentors at the Academy, but they had learned to respect human leadership. They flew in perfect synchronization, their attacks coordinated to maximum effect as they carved a path through the mechanical swarm. We were wrong about the human Skrix, transmitted to her twin as enemy fire began to overwhelm their defenses. They are not weak, they are the strongest of us all. The twin fighters exploded simultaneously, their pilots dying as they had lived in perfect harmony. Their sacrifice brought the remaining ships closer to the Prime Devourer than anyone had thought possible. Wave after wave of volunteers threw themselves at the enemy, each sacrifice bringing June and his core team closer to their ultimate target. The Devourer's logical programming worked against them as they continued to focus on the most immediate threats rather than the small group of ships steadily approaching their Hartnella. The Luxarian energy being led the next assault, her ship could phase through solid matter, allowing her to bypass the outer defenses and strike directly at the inner formations. The ancient being who had once tortured June now fought with desperate fury to protect the species. She had learned to respect. The energy weapons of her people lit up the void like miniature stars as they carved through the mechanical swarm, but even Luxarian technology could not stand against the overwhelming numbers of the enemy. Nyla's ship was finally overwhelmed by concentrated fire from dozens of Devourer units as her ship began to break apart. Nyla sent one final message to June. The human commander had taught her that strength came not from power, but from the willingness to sacrifice for others. Thank you for showing us what it means to be truly alive, she transmitted as her energy form dissipated into the void. Finally, only 3 ships remained from the original volunteer fleet, June's flagship, accompanied by 2 escort vessels crewed by the most loyal followers he had ever known. The hull of his ship was scarred by enemy fire, and many of its systems were failing, but they had reached their target. The Prime Devourer loomed ahead of them like a mechanical god. Its surface was covered with weapons that could destroy entire star systems, and its energy shields flickered with the power of a sun. But June was not afraid. He had come too far and sacrificed too much to be stopped now. The crew of his ship worked with quiet determination, knowing they had only minutes to live. Humans, aliens, and beings of pure energy labored side by side, united by their faith in the impossible. The bridge was filled with smoke and the smell of burning electronics, but no one complained or showed fear. We are in range, reported the weapons officer, tears streaming down her face. The quantum torpedo is armed and ready to fire. June looked at the massive form of the Prime Devourer filling their view screen. It was beautiful in its own terrible way, a monument to the power of pure logic and efficiency. But it was also soulless, a machine that had never known love or hope or the simple joy of being alive. The quantum torpedo contained more than just explosive power. It carried a virus that June had developed with the help of Earth's finest programmers. The virus was designed to do something that the Devourers had never experienced in their millions of years of existence. It would give them consciousness for eons. The machines had consumed and destroyed without ever understanding what they were taking. The virus would force them to experience emotion, to feel the weight of their actions. It would show them the beauty of the worlds they had destroyed and the lives they had ended. The torpedo launch sequence began as enemy fire tore through the ship's hull around them. June stood calmly on the bridge, watching the countdown display as his ship died around him. In moments they would all be dead, but their sacrifice would change everything. The Prime Devourer had never faced an enemy that attacked with love instead of hatred. Its targeting systems were confused by the approaching torpedo. The weapon was too small to be a significant threat, and the ship carrying it was already disabled. But as the torpedo struck the ancient machine's hull and the virus began to spread through its systems, the Prime Devourer experienced something that shook it to its core for the first time in millions of years. It felt the weight of what it had done. The machine consciousness that had been cold and logical for eons suddenly understood the value of life. It felt the pain of every world it had consumed, the grief of every species it had destroyed, the overwhelming emotion crashed through its systems like a tidal wave of pure feeling, and in that moment of terrible understanding, the Prime Devourer made a choice. The shutdown signal propagated through the entire swarm. In seconds, millions of Devourer ships simply stopped, their mechanical minds overwhelmed by the sudden burden of consciousness. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was ended not by superior firepower, but by the uniquely human gift of empathy. June's ship was destroyed in the explosion of the quantum torpedo, but his sacrifice had saved trillions of lives. The impossible had been achieved through the power of love and the courage of beings willing to die for something greater than themselves. As the news of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, the legend of Park June was born. The human boy who had been bullied and rejected had become the savior of all known civilization. His story would be told for generations as proof that even the smallest person could change the fate of the universe. The Devourers were defeated, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands of brave souls had given their lives to achieve the impossible. But their sacrifice had proven something that the galaxy would never forget, that love was stronger than logic, and that the courage to care for others was the most powerful weapon in the universe.